"I'm sorry, sir, but the gate is closed. You've missed your flight." The words delivered with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes, sliced through the already heavy air of Gate B12. Elias Vance, a man whose 80 years were etched into the lines on his face like a map of hard-won battles, simply nodded. His worn tweed jacket, a size too large, hung limply on his thin frame, and the scuffed leather satchel at his feet seemed to sag with a weariness that mirrored his own. He looked at the impassive face of the gate agent, then at the sleek jet, visible through the panoramic window, its engines beginning to whine. This wasn't just a flight, it was a promise, a pilgrimage, and now a closed door. The young woman had already turned away, her attention snagged by the next passenger in a growing line, their faces a mixture of impatience and thinly veiled pity for the old man. He was just another inconvenience, obstacle in their hurried lives, if you believe every soul carries a story worth hearing, a dignity deserving of recognition, no matter their outward appearance. Type honor in the comments below. Elias Vance had learned patience in crucibles most people only read about in history books or saw sanitized in films. His hands, gnarled by age and something Mara lingering ache from decades past, rested on the cheap plastic armrests of the airport seat he'd retreated to. He wasn't one for causing a fuss. His life had been lived largely in the quiet performance of duty, not in demanding attention. His journey to this airport, to this specific flight, was a solemn one. He was traveling to Washington, D.C. for a reunion, one of the last for the dwindling members of the 3rd Infantry Division, men who had faced hell together in the frozen landscapes of Korea. More than that, he was to be a guest of honor at a private ceremony at Arlington, a recognition long deferred, deeply personal. His satchel contained not much, a change of clothes, a worn Bible, and a small velvet-lined case that rarely saw the light of day. Inside it lay a star-shaped medal suspended from a pale blue ribbon adorned with 13 white stars. The Medal of Honor, he never wore it, rarely spoke of it. It represented a day of unimaginable sacrifice, of lives lost, and a duty fulfilled at a terrible cost. It wasn't a badge of pride so much as a weta, sacred trust. He was a man of simple means now, living on a modest pension in a small town where everyone knew him as Mr. Eli, the quiet old fellow who tended his garden and always had a kind word. Few, if any, knew the caliber of courage that resided within that unassuming frame. He had arrived at the airport with what he thought was ample time, but the unexpectedly long security lines, a confused shuffle between terminals, had eaten away at the minutes. Now, watching the plane being pushed back, a profound sense of sorrow, sharp and cold, settled over him. He had tried to explain, his voice soft, almost hesitant, when he first reached the gate a mere 3 minutes after the announced boarding closure. "Ma'am," he'd said to the gate agenta, young woman named Brenda, according to her name tag, her lips pursed in an expression of practiced authority. "I was delayed at security." Is there any chance Brenda hadn't even looked up from her computer screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard? "Boarding is closed, sir. Policy. Next flight with available seats isn't until tomorrow morning, and there will be a change fee." Her tone was flat, devoid of empathy, the rote response of someone who dealt with dozens of problems like him every day. Elias clutched the handle of his satchel. "Tomorrow will be too late," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's very important." He fumbled slightly with the clasp of his satchel, a fleeting thought of showing her the invitation. The official letterhead, but a lifetime of reticence held him back. Why should his importance be any different from anyone else's? He wasn't asking for special treatment, just a little understanding. "Everyone's flight is important, sir," Brenda had retorted, finally gracing him with a fleeting, dismissive glance. "You should have arrived earlier." The group of passengers behind him was growing restless, a few audible sighs, a businessman ostentatiously checking his watch. Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not of anger, but of a quiet resignation, mixed with a deep, aching disappointment. He wasn't just missing a flight, he was failing his comrades, those who were waiting, and those who couldn't be there. The weight of their memory pressed down on him. He stepped aside, allowing others to pass. His shoulders stooped a little more than usual. The finality of it was a leaden cloak. Brenda, seeing him linger, gestured impatiently to her supervisor. Mark, who was overseeing the boarding of another flight nearby, Mark, a man in his late 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of self-importance that seemed to puff out his chest, sauntered over. "Problem, Brenda?" he asked, his voice a notch too loud, designed to project authority. Brenda rolled her eyes. "This gentleman missed the boarding cutoff for flight 472, insists it's very important." The sarcasm was thinly veiled. Mark turned, his attention to Elias, his gaze sweeping over the old man's worn attire with a flicker of disdain. "Sir," Mark began, his tone condescending, as Agent Brenda explained, "airline policy is very clear. Once the doors are closed, they're closed. We have schedules to maintain. Thousands of passengers rely on us to be on time." Elias met his gaze, his own eyes, though clouded with age, still holding a spark of something resilient. "I understand schedules, young man. I've lived by them my whole life. Sometimes, however, circumstances warrant a little flexibility." "A little consideration?" Mark scoffed a short, sharp sound of derision. "Consideration for being late. The only consideration here is for the passengers who did make it on time. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have other flights to manage. You can speak to customer service about rebooking." He gave a curt, not a clear dismissal. The plane flight 472 was now taxiing away from the gate. Elias watched it go, a knot forming in his stomach. 9 minutes. 9 minutes since Brenda had uttered those final words. "You've missed your flight." He turned away from the window, the reflection showing a tired old man. He felt a profound wear, just of body, but of spirit. He had faced down enemy fire, endured horrors that still haunted his sleep. But this casual dismissal, this bureaucratic indifference felt like a different kind of wound, a small, sharp pebble of disrespect in the shoe of his soul. Defeated, Elias found an empty seat in the bustling terminal. Away from the immediate flurry of Gate B12, he sank into it heavily, the cheap plastic groaning under his slight weight. He placed his satchel on his lap, his fingers tracing the worn leather. Slowly, carefully, he unclasped it, perhaps looking at the invitation, at the embossed seal of the Department of the Army, would offer some small solace reminder of why this journey mattered so much. He pulled out a sheath of papers, his hands trembling slightly. Among them was the official invitation to the reunion and a separate, more formal letter regarding the Arlington ceremony. Tucked beneath these was a faded photograph of a group of young men in uniform, their faces grimy but grinning himself, a gaunt, dark-haired youth among them as he carefully sifted through the papers. A small, almost insignificant object slipped from between the pages and fell silently onto the carpeted floor. A simple, dark blue lapel pin, the kind that denoted service. But this one was different. A tiny rosette dot, it was the lapel pin replica of the Medal of Honor given to recipients for civilian wear. He rarely wore it, but sometimes, for journeys like this, he'd pin it inside his jacket, a private talisman. Young woman, sitting a few seats away, engrossed in her phone, happened to glance up. Her eyes, initially indifferent, caught the glint of the small, uniquely shaped pin on the floor. She frowned, a flicker of something curiosity, recognition. In her expression, she watched as Elias, with a sigh, bent down stiffly to retrieve it. He didn't notice her gaze. He simply picked up the pin, his old fingers fumbling with it for a moment, before he carefully placed it back into his SATCHEL. The young woman, an Air Force reservist named Sarah Bott, on her way to a training exercise, felt a jolt. She knew that Rosette, her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran, had pointed it out to her once in a documentary. His voice filled with reverence. "You see that, Sarah? That little flower? That means a man walked through fire and came out a hero." The memory was vivid. She looked at the old man truly, looked at him, seeing past the worn clothes and the tired posture. Could it be? She hesitated for only a moment. Then, with a sense of urgency, she discreetly pulled out her phone and made a quick call to a contact. At the USO office located within the airport, her voice was low and urgent. Less than 5 minutes later, the atmosphere around Gate B12, which had returned to its usual hum of pre-flight announcements and passenger chatter, underwent a sudden, palpable shift to uniformed Air Force security forces. Personnel entered the area with a brisk, purposeful stride, their expressions serious. They were followed a moment later by a man whose presence seemed to command instant attention. He was tall, ramrod straight, his uniform crisp and adorned with the stars of a brigadier general. This was General Peterson, the commander of a nearby Air Force base, who happened to be at the airport for an official liaison visit and had been quickly rerouted by the urgent call from the USO, patched through from the observant reservist. The general's eyes scanned the waiting area, settling almost immediately on Elias, who was still seated, staring blankly at the departure board. The hope draining from him with each passing minute, General Peterson strode directly toward him, his polished boots echoing on the tiled floor. The security force's personnel flanked him at a respectful distance. Passengers looked up. Conversations died down. Airline staff, including Brenda and Mark, who were now managing a different gate, paused their tasks, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Elias, lost in his thoughts, didn't notice their approach until the general stood directly before him. "Mr. Vance." General Peterson's voice was deep, respectful, cutting through the sudden hush. Elias looked up, his eyes slowly focusing, a flicker of surprise in them. "Elias Vance." The general repeated gently. Elias nodded slowly. Yes, yes, that's me." He looked bewildered, unsure why this high-ranking officer was addressing him. General Peterson's demeanor softened with a profound respect. "Sir," he said, his voice resonating with an emotion that caught the attention of everyone within earshot, "it is an honor." He then did something that sent a ripple of shock through the onlookers. He executed a flawless, sharp salute. Elias, momentarily stunned, instinctively began to rise, his old soldier's reflexes kicking in, a lifetime of discipline etched into his very bones. The general gently motioned for him to remain seated. "Please, sir," he said. He turned his gaze now Flint-Hardaward, the airline staff congregating near the gate desk, particularly Brenda and Mark, who were watching with growing unease. "Is this the man who was denied boarding on Flight 472 to Washington, D.C.?" he asked, his voice no longer gentle but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Brenda swallowed, her earlier confidence evaporating. Mark stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "General, there seems to be some misunderstanding. This passenger arrived after the boarding gate was closed. Airline regulations are quite strict." General Peterson cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. "Regulations," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let me tell you about something that transcends your regulations. This man, Mr. Elias Vance, is a recipient of the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp went through the nearby passengers. Brenda's face paled, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mark's jaw tightened, a flush creeping up his neck. He was awarded it for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On Hill 267 in Korea, the general continued, his voice ringing with pride and suppressed anger. He is on his way to Washington for a reunion with his brothers in arms, and to be honored at Arlington, a journey your regulations saw fit to impede. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and accusatory. He then produced his own phone. "Get me the tower and the FAA liaison." Now, the next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos and dawning horror for the airline staff. General Peterson's call swift and decisive invoked protocols rarely used. Within 9 minutes of Elias having been officially told he'd missed his flight as he sat dejected, the order came down. All outbound traffic from that runway was to be temporarily halted. A federal order. Mark and Brenda looked at each other, their faces ashen. The sheer audacity of the intervention, the power wielded so swiftly, was terrifying. An airline supervisor from a much higher pay grade than Mark appeared, his face grim, already briefed. He approached General Peterson, his demeanor one of profound apology. "General, on behalf of the airline, I offer our sincerest apologies to Mr. Vance. This is unacceptable. We will arrange immediate transport for him." Peterson's gaze remained stern. Double quotes, "Mr. Vance isn't just any passenger. He is a national hero. He deserves more than arranged transport. He deserves our utmost respect and assistance." He turned to Elias, his expression softening once more. "Sir, we will get you to Washington. If necessary, I'll fly you there myself on a military transport." Elias, overwhelmed, could only nod. A tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek, the high-ranking airline supervisor. now fully grasping the magnitude of the situation, began issuing rapid-fire instructions. Another aircraft, preparing for a later departure to a different city, but with a connection to D.C., was to be held. A first-class seat was cleared. Mark and Brenda stood frozen, watching the whirlwind of activity, the weight of their earlier dismissiveness crushing them. Passengers murmured, their initial annoyance at the delays replaced by awe and a dawning understanding as snippets of the general's words spread through the crowd. The man they had seen as a frail, late old man was a figure of incredible bravery, a living legend. The runway closure was brief, a symbolic halt, a testament to the nation's commitment to honor its heroes. But its impact was monumental. The airline supervisor personally escorted Ilios with General Peterson by his side to the new gate. The walk through the terminal was different this time. People made way, their expressions respectful. Some even offered quiet nods or words of thanks. The news had spread like wildfire at the new gate. The flight crew was waiting. The captain himself stepped out to greet Elias, his hand extended. "Mr. Vance, it's an honor to have you aboard, sir." The earlier humiliation Elias had felt was replaced by a warm, if slightly uncomfortable, glow of recognition. Brenda and Mark were conspicuously absent, reportedly in a meeting with senior management, the outcome of which was likely to be severe. Before boarding, General Peterson clasped Elias's hand firmly. They should have known, Elias. They should have seen. Elias managed a small, tired smile. People see what they expect to see, General. An old man in old clothes. They'll see differently now, at least here, Peterson said, a grim satisfaction. In his voice, he assured Elias that his luggage, including the satchel, with its precious contents, would be transferred with utmost care as Elias settled into his spacious first-class seat. The flight attendant offered him a drink, her voice filled with genuine warmth and respect. He finally felt he could breathe again, the tight knot in his chest loosening. He was on his way. The promise would be kept. The memory of the indifferent faces at Gate B12 began to fade, replaced by the quiet dignity of General Peterson's salute and the genuine respect he was now being shown. The engines hummed a comforting sound this time, a promise of arrival. The plane soared above the clouds, carrying Elias Vance toward his destination, toward the brothers who awaited him, toward the hallowed ground of Arlington. The incident at the airport, though deeply upsetting initially, had culminated in an unexpected affirmation of respect, a powerful reminder that true honor, though sometimes hidden beneath a humble exterior, endures and demands recognition. Back at the airport, the repercussions for Brenda and Mark were swift and decisive. Both faced disciplinary action, including mandatory retraining in customer service, with a special emphasis on dignity and respect for all passengers, particularly veterans and the elderly. The airline issued a formal public apology, not just to Mr. Vance, but to all veterans, reaffirming their commitment to honoring those who served. The story of the Medal of Honor recipient and the halted runway became a quiet legend among airport staff, a stark lesson in humility and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The moral is clear. Every individual carries within them a story, a history, a measure of worth that cannot be judged by the cut of their clothes or the quietness of their demeanor. True, heroes often walk among us, unassuming and unrecognized until a moment calls forth their hidden valor or demands the respect they are rightly owed. The world is richer for their quiet strength, and we are poorer when we fail to see it. Elias Vance made it to his reunion and to the ceremony at Arlington. He stood tall, not in his worn tweed, but in a borrowed suit, the Medal of Honor, finally displayed not as a burden but as a testament to the enduring spirit of courage and sacrifice. And perhaps, just perhaps, those who heard his story learned to look a little closer, to listen a little more intently, to honor the hero that might be standing right in front of them. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary courage hidden in ordinary lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Sparks for more powerful narratives. Type honor in the comments below to pay tribute to heroes like Elias Vance.